Evolution is a wild concept, and even though it's only been about 150 years since it first entered mainstream science, we've gathered an incredible amount of evidence in those years to back it up. However, because it is such a vast and complex subject, there's only so much of it that you can learn in a short time frame, such as in high school biology class. This unfortunately leaves a lot of people missing out on some of its most fascinating aspects. And so, from your own genes battling each other to an arms race as old as time, here are 4 things that school might have missed when teaching you about evolution. When we think of the human body and the trillions of cells that it's comprised of, it's easy to believe that every little bit of us is working harmoniously together to keep our organism alive, but recent research has shown that it might not be that simple. First put forward by Richard Dawkins in the 1970s, the selfish gene theory, also called the gene-centered view of evolution, posits that our genes are only out to take care of themselves, treating their organism as little more than a vehicle which they use to reproduce. Now, it sounds really strange. After all, genes aren't complex enough to think and act for themselves, as they're simply just chunks of genetic instructions. But the idea isn't that they have these little bits of consciousness that allows them to make decisions about survival, but rather that everything about our genes' evolution was to enhance their own chances of being copied and passed on to future generations, perhaps even at the expense of other genes. For decades, this was a subject of hot debate among biologists, and while we still don't know if all DNA is inherently selfish in nature, studies in recent years have found that at least some of it certainly is. The craziest examples are the aptly named WTF genes. These parasitic genes interfere with the reproduction of their cell by poisoning its gametes. As you may know, gametes, or sex cells such as eggs and sperm, have only half the DNA of their parent. Combining 2 halves from separate parents leads to greater genetic diversity, which allows for a species to be more resilient, but WTF genes are not a fan of it because it means there's a chance they get left out during the formation of gametes and not passed on to offspring. And this is why they've evolved some pretty ingenious ways to ensure that they get selected. WTF4, for example, is a gene found in the bacteria S. kombucha, also called fission yeast. During meiosis, the process which during a cell creates its gametes, WTF4 poisons the whole batch of developing sex cells. However, in the most selfish way possible, this poison has an antidote which can only be produced by gametes containing the WTF4 gene. This ensures that every cell not containing WTF4 dies off, and the gene has a near certain chance of being passed on. Today's video is brought to you by one of my more unusual sponsors, and that is Foreo. They're a beauty company that decided to sponsor me for some reason. But really, look, I'm entering middle age. Let's just say that. When do you enter middle age? I'm probably technically there. But look, I'm looking younger every day, thanks to Foreo. Look, I've told you about the Bear before, but today I want to talk about Luna 4. This is a fantastic 2-in-1 smart facial cleansing and firming device. With Luna 4, you can enjoy an easy skincare routine tailored perfectly to your needs. It offers personalized cleansing, app-guided firming massages, and relaxing T-sonic pulsations. And here's the best part. It's super hygienic with ultra hygienic silicone touch points that are 35 times more hygienic than brushes with nylon bristles. And look, I swear I'm not becoming a beauty YouTuber, but I've had spots from using bad brushes and cloths in the past, and this, none of those issues. Plus, they've got app-guided firming massages. I have personal masseuse on your device. You can use the Foreo For You app to control settings, access video-guided routines, and even find your device in case you've misplaced it. And the best part, it is all clinically proved. This can be for you. I got it for me, but I also got it as a gift for my wife, because why not? And for a limited time, the first 100 people can snag this Luna 4 at 35% off using the link below. Perfect for you or your significant other, or just treat yourself like I did. Thanks to Foreo for sponsoring this video, and now back to our regular programming. In 2017, researchers from the Stowers Institute for Medical Research narrowed this down even further by isolating the RNA code that creates the poison, dyeing it green, and isolating the RNA message that codes the antidote and dyeing it red. And sure enough, their images showed every cell displaying the green marker, but only those with WTF4 displaying the red antidote. This adds credibility to the selfish gene theory, because killing a good number of your gametes is a hindrance to overall reproduction for the organism and only benefits the specific gene that's developed such a devious tactic. Now, this is still a hot topic of research at the moment, and there's hope that understanding these killer genes could provide insights into infertility and even pest control. Now, on the flip side, there also exists DNA in our body that isn't selfish, helpful, or anything in between, but seems to simply do nothing. Upon its discovery more than 50 years ago, this was appropriately nicknamed junk DNA, and its existence is pretty mysterious, so let's break it down. The human body contains between 20 and 25,000 total genes, the expressions of our DNA that make us who we are. But surprisingly, these genes only make up about 2% of all our DNA, which left scientists in the 1960s scratching their heads as to why we seem to have so much useless genetic information stored in our bodies. This is why it was originally called junk DNA, as the rest of it does not code for any proteins and seem to do nothing more than simply exist. Now, in the years since, we've discovered that not all of this junk DNA is quite so useless. Some of it provides structural function for the coding sections of DNA, while others protect and regulate the genes. The preferred term is now non-coding DNA, as it most likely does something, we just aren't sure what much of it does. One idea is that much of this non-coding DNA was useful in the past, perhaps long ago to our evolutionary ancestors, and is simply a relic of ancient times. What's even crazier is that some parts of this DNA, called transposons, or jumping DNA, is able to shift its location in the genome, potentially altering gene expression wherever it lands. In fact, it's believed by some that these transposons may have evolved from the genetic material of ancient viruses, which could explain why they behave so differently from the rest. Nearly everyone has heard of natural selection, popularly summarized as the survival of the fittest. This mechanism of evolution has been highly influential on the diversity of life around the globe, and it's pretty simple to understand. The more likely an organism is to survive, the more likely it is to pass on its genes, and thus, over many generations, the organism most fit for survival will continue to breed, while those less fit will be pushed off the stage. An obvious example of this is the common rat snake, a non-venomous snake commonly found across North America. But because this continent contains many different biomes and climates, rat snakes have evolved unique colors to blend in better with their varied environments. For example, the Baja California rat snake usually sports a light shade of brown, consistent with its dry location, while the black rat snake in Louisiana has adapted with much darker tones to better fit the wetlands and dense foliage found there. But make no mistake, this isn't all there is to evolution, as natural selection is just one of the many ways that a species can change over time that doesn't actually have anything to do with it being more able to survive. Take genetic drift, for example, which is when the traits of a species change due largely to chance instead of reproductive success. One example of genetic drift is the bottleneck effect, which can occur when some sort of catastrophe eliminates a large percentage of the population, leaving behind a peculiar set of survivors, forever affecting the gene pool. To understand this, imagine a hypothetical island that's inhabited by lots and lots of brown and black rabbits. The brown genes are dominant, while the black genes are recessive, meaning that the majority of rabbits on the island are brown. However, one day, the island's dormant volcano wakes up with an eruption, devastating much of the island's life. In the aftermath, only a handful of rabbits remain, all of them having two of the recessive genes for black fur. As the island recovers from the natural disaster and the populations begin to recover, there will no longer be any brown rabbits, not because they were less fit for survival or had some sort of disadvantage, but simply because of the genetic bottleneck which they were coincidentally left out of. Something similar can also occur in the founder effect, which happens when a small population migrates to a new area. Imagine if, in the previous example, a few of those black rabbits snuck onto a docked pirate ship and disembarked onto a completely new island. As they continued to populate, the new island would be filled purely with black rabbits, even if this color isn't technically the most advantageous for survival. And finally, there's also the complete opposite of natural selection, which is artificial selection, also called selective breeding. This is when humans choose traits that they find desirable in a plant or animal and breed these accordingly. Over the centuries, this can have drastic effects on what was once a wild animal, turning ancient, dangerous beasts into modern, calm, domestic cows, for example. It's also how we went over thousands of generations from literal wolves to chihuahuas. The common understanding in evolution is that it requires many, many years to take effect. Generations upon generations of changes unnoticeable between parent and offspring, but after millions of years, potentially resulting in an entirely new species. But thankfully, we don't always need to breed millions of generations to watch these theories play out, as there are many examples of rapid evolution that have taken place on a much shorter timescale. Rapid evolution is a great way to show the real-life applications of the scientific theory. First up, we have human beings. In the last few thousand years or so, there have been several instances of fairly rapid evolution, leading to greater variety among humans around the world. Perhaps the most famous of these is the existence of blue eyes, which is believed to have originated as a genetic mutation between 6,000 and 10,000 years ago. If this is true, it means that all blue-eyed people share a common ancestor from this time period. We have good reason to believe this is accurate, as researchers have even located the specific mutation responsible for the color change. Another human adaptation can be found in Asia, in the Tibetan Plateau. Nearly 5 million people reside there, despite the average elevation coming in at a staggering 4,000 meters or more than 13,000 feet. Such conditions are hard on people from lower altitudes, as there is less oxygen. This can lead to a whole host of health issues like blood clotting from a higher production of hemoglobin. But Tibetans have a few key differences from lowlanders that allow them to thrive here. Larger lungs, increased lung efficiency, and lower hemoglobin levels, to name a few, all of which allows the body to utilize oxygen more efficiently. Looking at the genetic record, it's believed that these changes began to appear around 4,700 years ago, or an estimated 190 generations. And it's not just humans that have evolved recently, because our actions as a species have caused others to evolve as well. Pink salmon migrate to spawn 2 weeks earlier than they did 40 years ago, thanks to a slight increase in average ocean temperature. In southern Finland, tawny owls have historically been a pale shade of grey, allowing them to blend in with the heavy snowfall that accompanies winter. However, as winters in recent years have been milder and with less average snowfall, the percentage of brown and reddish-brown owls has increased in just a few generations. And finally, there is bacterial evolution, which, yes, does in fact take many generations, but bacteria reproduce so quickly that it's a relatively short time from a human perspective. Bacterial evolution is one of the foremost issues in modern medicine because it can result in antibiotic-resistant bacteria. The way this happens is pretty straightforward. Imagine you contract an infection, say bacterial pneumonia. You visit a doctor, you get a prescription, and you begin taking antibiotics. As the medicine reaches the population of bacteria in your body, the ones with the weakest defense are quickly killed off, while the more resilient ones survive for longer and require more dosages to be finished off. However, as the weaker bacteria die off and your symptoms start to alleviate, you decide that you feel fine enough to stop taking the medicine. After all, it messes with your stomach and you've had enough. But failing to take the full dose can result in those more resilient bacteria ultimately surviving. And because they multiply rapidly, your infection and symptoms can soon re-emerge, this time requiring an even stronger antibiotic because the microbes in your body were born with a natural resistance to the previous ones. And this doesn't just happen with bacteria. Fungi can develop antifungal resistance, and viruses can develop antiviral resistance. And with the widespread use and often misuse of these type of medications, the problem is bigger than ever. What was once thought to be a problem that would be faced in the future has suddenly caught up to us. In 2014, the World Health Organization said, "This serious threat is no longer a prediction for the future. It is happening right now in every region of the world and has the potential to affect anyone of any age in any country." As long as life has existed on Earth, it has existed in perpetual competition for resources. As one species evolves with an advantage, another evolves with a response. This constant tug-of-war of adaptations and counter-adaptations has resulted in much of the biodiversity in the world today, and in many cases resembles an arms race. There are two ways an evolutionary arms race can be classified. That is, symmetrical or asymmetrical. In a symmetrical arms race, the evolutionary pressure is in the same direction, meaning both species try to outperform the other with similar adaptations. A great example of a symmetrical arms race is a dense rainforest of tall trees. The taller trees have access to more sunlight and thus more nutrients, leading to the tree top level growing higher and higher as generations of trees continue to overtake each other in height. In an asymmetrical arms race, the two contestants have different goals and thus adapt in very different ways, often a case of predator versus prey. A good example of this would be cheetahs and gazelles, where generations of gazelles continue to be quicker to escape danger, while generations of cheetahs evolve to be even faster to catch up with them. Throughout nature, there are some fascinating results of this age-old arms race. Some bats have evolved to live in dark caves, primarily using echolocation to hunt prey. One of their favorite snacks, moths, in turn, evolved to detect these frequencies and initiate evasive maneuvers upon hearing it. This has led to later generations of bats using a higher frequency for their echolocation, and then generations of moths creating their own sounds to disrupt the bat's perception. Some moths can even distinguish between the frequencies used by bats to either locate or chase once they've locked onto prey. Another example is the rough-skinned newt and the common garter snake. The newt has skin glands that produce tetrodotoxin, a highly potent nerve toxin to ward off would-be predators. The garter snake, in turn, has adapted over the years to be immune to this toxin. This has then resulted in the newt increasing the amount of toxin it produces by a large amount. The interesting thing here is that garter snakes in a habitat with no newts will have low levels of resistance, and newts in habitats with no garter snakes will have low levels of toxin. However, in the habitats where the two species collide, we see the result of said arms race with high levels of toxin and high levels of resistance. This evolutionary escalation is a fascinating topic of research, giving us a glimpse into what problems a species may have faced in the past, and giving us a bit of a sneak peek of how they might adapt in the future.